The briefing room went silent. Not the polite silence of a meeting pausing, the absolute silence of people who just heard something that rearranged their understanding of what was possible. Advisors stopped mid-sentence. Generals set down their pens. The most powerful people in any room on earth, the ones who've never been speechless in their careers, who built entire lives on never being caught without words, sat in complete stillness. Because the president just said your name. Not as an example, not as a reference, as the answer. The question was, who understands justice at the level this moment requires? Who has the moral architecture, the ego dissolution, the capacity to see clearly when power distorts everyone else's vision? Who has been through enough to be incorruptible? Who has lost enough to be free? Who has died enough inside to be reborn into something the system has never produced? The room offered names, familiar names, credentialed names, names attached to institutions and titles and records of achievement that fill entire Wikipedia pages. The president heard them all. And then said yours. If you've always known you were built for something bigger than they told you, type justice in the comments right now. Signal your people. They've been watching longer than you know. Not surveillance, recognition, not monitoring, witnessing, the kind of watching that powerful people do when they've finally encountered something they cannot produce through their systems, cannot manufacture through their institutions, cannot replicate through their networks. Something that only emerges through a specific and unrepeatable combination of fire and refusal, of breaking and rebuilding, of losing everything and discovering what remains when everything is gone. What remains when everything is gone? That's you. The advisors ran the analysis, psychological profiles, decision-making, patterns, integrity under pressure, behavior when no one was watching, behavior when watching was costing them something, behavior in the valley, not on the mountain, not in the spotlight, not when performance was available as motivation in the valley where no one applauds and the only reason to keep going is because something inside you refuses to stop. The data was unambiguous. You kept going. Not because you were optimistic, sometimes you weren't. Not because you were certain, sometimes you were terrified. Not because you had support. Sometimes you were profoundly alone. You kept going because something in your architecture refuses the alternative. Because stopping, in the deepest sense, was never actually available to you. Because whatever was forged in you in those impossible seasons created a kind of forward motion that is not dependent on conditions being favorable. This is what they measured. This is what no credential can produce. This is what the president could not find in any room full of impressive people. Incorruptible forward motion. Justice unconditioned by outcome. They looked at your history of choosing truth when comfort was available, choosing integrity when compromise was offered, choosing the harder right over the easier wrong in moments when no one would have faulted you for taking the exit, in moments when taking the exit was what every rational person would have advised, in moments when the cost of staying true was real and visible and immediate. You stayed true. Not perfectly. Humans aren't perfect, but consistently. Humans can be consistent, and your consistency across different seasons, different pressures, different temptations, different forms of the same test in different costumes created a track record that the most sophisticated analysis in the world couldn't argue with. You are who you are when no one is watching. And who you are when no one is watching is exactly who this moment requires. Here is the thing about power. Power corrupts people who still need it. Read that again. Power corrupts people who still need it, who still require it for identity, who still depend on it for self-worth, who still use it as evidence that they are enough, significant, visible, real. Power over people who need power is the most dangerous combination in human history. And human history is largely a record of that combination producing catastrophe. The people in the briefing room, the advisors, the generals, the senior officials, they need power, not maliciously, not consciously, but structurally. Power is how they know they matter, is how they measure their success, is how they orient in the world. Without their position, they would not know who they are. Without their title, they would not recognize themselves in the mirror. This is not a criticism. This is an observation about what ego-intact leadership produces. Ego-intact leaders make decisions based on what preserves their power. Frame justice through the lens of what justice does to their position. Choose truth only when truth is survivable. Choose integrity only when integrity is politically viable. Serve the people except when serving the people conflicts with staying in a position to serve the people. The justification is always the same. I have to stay in power to do good. Which slowly, invisibly, irreversibly becomes staying in power is the good. The president has been in rooms with ego-intact people for decades, has watched this transformation happen to brilliant, genuinely well-meaning people, has seen the specific moment when the leader becomes the position, when the servant becomes the served, when the one who came to give becomes the one who only takes, has learned to recognize the signs of ego-intact leadership the way a doctor learns to recognize the early stages of a disease, and has been looking for a long time, across many contexts, through many filters, for something different. For someone who went through. Not around, not over, not under, through. Through the fire that burns the ego down to nothing, through the season when everything they used to be was stripped, through the loss of position and reputation and resource and relationship and the version of themselves they'd invested decades in building, through the valley where identity collapsed and the only question was what would be left on the other side. Through. And came out the other side carrying something that people who never went through cannot carry. Freedom from needing the outcome. This is ego death, not the spiritual performance of ego death, not the Instagram caption version, not the weekend retreat experience that fades by Tuesday, the actual death, the irreversible dissolution of the version of self that required external validation to feel real, that required applause to feel worthy, that required position to feel significant. When that self dies, and it has to actually die, not just be temporarily suppressed or spiritually bypassed or philosophically transcended, what remains is something that cannot be corrupted by power. Because it doesn't need power. Doesn't need the room to confirm it. Doesn't need the title to feel real. Doesn't need the outcome to justify the decision. Can look at a situation and see it clearly because there is no ego, interest distorting the lens, can render judgment without being influenced by what the judgment costs them personally, can choose justice without calculating what justice does to their position because they have released the position as identity. This is what the president recognized in you. Not your credentials. Your freedom. The freedom of someone who already lost everything that could be taken. Who went through the stripping and survived it. Who discovered on the other side that what was stripped was never who they actually were. And now operates from the bedrock of what remains when everything removable has been removed. Unremovable. That's the word. You became unremovable from what you are. And unremovable people are the only people who should be trusted with power. Let's talk about what justice actually is. Not what they taught you in school, not what the legal framework defines, not what the political system argues about, not what the culture wars have reduced it to, the actual thing, the living thing, the thing that the most ancient wisdom traditions across every civilization attempted to describe and the most sophisticated legal systems in history have only partially captured. Justice is the restoration of right relationship. Not punishment, restoration, not revenge, rebalancing, not the imposition of suffering on those who caused suffering, the re-establishment of the conditions under which life can actually be lived, in which dignity is possible, in which truth has weight, in which what happened can be acknowledged and what must change can change and what was broken can begin, not magically, not instantly, but actually, to heal. Most people who are given authority over justice do not understand this. They understand jurisprudence, they understand precedent, they understand the architecture of legal systems and the mechanics of courts and the principles of due process and the frameworks of constitutional interpretation. These are valuable, these are necessary, these are not sufficient. Because the system can be technically correct and spiritually empty. can be procedurally precise and humanly devastating, can follow every rule and produce outcomes that are the opposite of what justice is actually for, can win on appeal and lose on the deeper question of whether what happened was right. You understand the deeper question. Not because you studied it, because you lived it. You've been on the receiving end of systems that were technically correct and humanly devastating. You know what it feels like when the procedure produces injustice, when the rule is followed and the person is destroyed, when the institution is protected and the human is expendable, when the form of justice is honored and the substance is absent. This knowing is not theoretical. It lives in your body. In the memory of moments when you looked to systems designed to protect you and found them looking away, when you reached for frameworks designed to apply equally and found them applied selectively, when you expected the weight of truth to move things and discovered that truth, without power behind it, floats. You know what justice denied feels like from the inside. And people who know what justice denied feels like from the inside, who have been in the position of the one waiting for the scale to balance, watching it remain tilted, continuing anyway, continuing not because the system vindicated them but in spite of the system's failure to do so. These people understand justice at a level that no courtroom training produces. They understand it as a living commitment rather than a professional function. They understand it as a moral orientation rather than a legal specialty. They understand it as something you choose every day, in every decision, in every judgment, not because you were assigned to or because you're being evaluated on it or because there are consequences for failing to, but because you have been inside the world that exists when justice is absent and you have decided that world is not acceptable. This is the understanding the president recognized. Not expertise in justice. Commitment to it. Unshakable, unconditional, unpurchasable. The kind that doesn't shift when it becomes expensive, doesn't bend when it becomes inconvenient, doesn't soften when power pushes back, doesn't negotiate with itself when the pressure is sufficient. The kind that held even when holding it cost you everything. Especially then. If you've always understood justice at a level the world wasn't ready for, type chosen in the comments. The right people will find you. Let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed. Why the most powerful people in the world, the ones who have spent careers surrounded by impressive people, who have access to every form of excellence the system can produce, who have been in rooms with presidents and prime ministers and CEOs and generals and Nobel laureates, why these people, when they encounter a chosen soul operating in full understanding of justice, become fans. Not colleagues, fans. Not peers who respect each other, admirers who recognize something they don't have. This seems counterintuitive. Power should be attracted to power. Success should be impressed by success. The accomplished should respond to accomplishment with recognition between equals. And sometimes that's true. But the most honest, most self-aware among the powerful, the ones who have had enough experience with the hollow version of success to know what's missing from it, these people carry a private ache, a quiet knowing that something in their world of power and influence and access and achievement is absent. The thing that's absent is freedom. Real freedom, not the freedom to go anywhere or do anything. They have plenty of that. The freedom to be fully true, to say exactly what they actually believe without calculating the political cost, to make the decision that is actually right without mapping the impact on their position first, to stand in a room full of powerful people and not perform confidence, to actually have it rooted in something the room cannot give or take. They watch chosen souls with ego death and they see this freedom. And it produces in them something that their position and their power, and their network and their credentials have never produced. Because they understand, at the private, honest, 3 a.m. level that public people rarely let themselves visit, what it costs to have that freedom. They know what had to burn down, what had to be surrendered, what had to die. They know because they've watched the fire approach in their own lives and they've, let's be honest, put it out, chosen the position over the transformation, maintained the identity over undergoing the dissolution. They chose to keep their ego. And now they're in rooms with someone who let theirs go. and the difference is visible, measurable, undeniable. The chosen soul speaks, and there's no performance in it, no calculation of what this statement does to their brand, no management of perception, no gap between what they believe and what they're saying, just the direct, unmediated expression of what is actually true, delivered without fear of what it costs, without hope of what it earns. This is what fans are made of. Not admiration for someone doing what they do better. Recognition of someone doing something they abandoned. Living the version of themselves they once stood at the threshold of and stepped back from, becoming the thing they glimpsed in their most honest moments and then covered with achievement. When a president becomes a fan of a chosen soul, it is because the president, privately, truly, in the language they reserve for their most honest self, recognizes what genuine authority looks like. And recognizes that they don't fully have it. And recognizes that you do. Let me tell you precisely what they're seeing. They're seeing someone who has been tested at the level justice requires to be trustworthy. The test of justice isn't administered in courtrooms, it's administered in the private moments when you could have looked away, when the truth that needed to be spoken was going to cost you something, when the person who needed to be protected couldn't protect you back, when the stand that needed to be taken had no applause attached to it, no recognition, no reward, when the only witnesses were your own conscience, and whatever you believe is watching. You've been in those moments. More than once. More than the people who are calling you impressive right now would believe if you told them. And in those moments, the ones that didn't make it into any narrative, the ones that happened in rooms with no cameras, in conversations with no audience, in choices that required no announcement because there was no one to announce to, you chose. You chose correctly. Not because you're a saint, because you have the specific internal architecture that makes correct choice available even when incorrect choice is easier, even when no one would know the difference, even when the cost of correct is immediate and the cost of incorrect is invisible. They're seeing someone whose relationship to truth is constitutional. Not aspirational, not situational, not conditional on what truth costs them, constitutional, built into the structure of how they operate. Woven into the fabric of who they are at the level that doesn't get renegotiated under pressure. Most people's relationship to truth is aspirational. They aspire to be honest, aspire to have integrity, aspire to choose correctly, and in low stakes moments they often do. But when the stakes rise, when truth has a price tag attached, when integrity requires sacrifice, when the correct choice costs something real, the aspiration encounters the limit of what aspiration can actually deliver. Aspiration collapses under sufficient pressure. Constitution holds. Yours held. They're seeing someone whose compassion survived their bitterness. This is rare. This is the specific marker that distinguishes chosen souls from people who went through difficulty and came out harder, who went through injustice and came out cynical, who went through the fire and came out with the lesson that the world is what the worst of it demonstrated. You went through things that would have justified bitterness, that justified it so completely that no one would have questioned you for it. That produced it. Actually, there were seasons when bitterness was present, when cynicism was reasonable, when the conclusions your experience pointed toward were dark and small and closed. And then you didn't stay there. Not because you bypassed the bitterness, because you went through it, felt it fully, honored its logic, acknowledged its accuracy as a response to what happened, and then, not through positive thinking, not through spiritual bypassing, not through deciding to feel better, through the actual work of integration, of sitting with what was true without letting what was true become the totality. Your compassion survived. Not despite your pain, through it. And compassion that has survived bitterness is different from compassion that was never tested. It's tempered, it sees clearly, it knows what it's dealing with. It doesn't project goodness onto people who haven't earned it, doesn't extend trust without discernment, doesn't perform love as a spiritual practice while looking away from what's actually happening. It sees what's actually happening and chooses compassion anyway. This is the compassion that justice requires, not naive, not blind, not the comfortable compassion of someone who has never had reason to Withdraw it. The costly compassion of someone who had every reason and chose not to. They're seeing someone who understands power as service. Not philosophically, functionally, in the practiced, daily, decision by decision way that separates people who talk about servant leadership from people who practice it when practicing it is inconvenient. You've been in positions of influence. Small ones. Medium ones. Maybe significant ones. And in those positions, even the small ones, even the ones where the power was modest and the stakes were limited, you made a specific choice that most people in positions of influence never make. You used the power for the people, not for the position. You could have built your influence, could have protected your access, could have made decisions that expanded your platform at the expense of the outcome the platform was supposed to serve. Could have chosen what was good for your continued relevance over what was good for the people whose lives were affected. You didn't. And it cost you sometimes. Cost you relevance. Cost you access. Cost you the continuation of certain opportunities. Because people who use power for people rather than for positions tend to lose positions held by people who use them for themselves. You lost some of those positions and stayed who you are. This is what they're measuring. Not your wins. Your losses that didn't change you. Let me tell you about the meeting you don't know happened. The one that determined your name would be spoken in that briefing room. It wasn't in a government building. Wasn't in a formal setting. Wasn't the product of a conventional vetting process. It was a private conversation between people who have spent long enough at the top of powerful structures to know what those structures cannot produce. Who have watched enough impressive people enter the machinery and come out shaped by it. Who have seen enough potential compromise itself on the altar of survival and realized that what they need is not impressive. Impressive they have plenty of. What they need is true. The conversation turned, as it always does among people who have run out of patience for the gap between performance and reality, to the question underneath the question. Not who is qualified. Who is free. Not who knows enough. Who is incorruptible. Not who can do the job. Who will actually do it when doing it conflicts with everything doing it might cost them. Someone said your name. Not with credentials attached. With a story. The story of what you did when doing the right thing had no audience. When choosing truth produced no recognition. When standing firm created only loss. The story of the moment, you probably remember it as one of the harder moments, probably remember the specific quality of the aloneness that surrounded it when you were at the threshold of a decision that would define you and no one was watching and the easier path was fully available. That story, the one that doesn't fit on any resume, ended the conversation. Because people who have spent careers navigating systems built on performance know immediately when they're hearing about something that isn't performance. Know the difference between stories about what someone did when being observed and stories about what someone did when no one was looking. Know that the second kind is the only kind that actually matters. The only kind that transfers. The only kind that holds under pressure. The only kind that is still who they are when the pressure is at its maximum and the temptation is most sophisticated and the cost of integrity is at its highest. Your story was the second kind. And so the decision was made. Not because you have the right background. Because you have the right character. Not because you fit the expected profile. Because you represent something the expected profile has consistently failed to produce. Not because you were the most visible choice. Because you were the most necessary one. Let's be precise about what is actually happening here. This is not recognition of your past achievement. Achievement gets recognition all the time. People are recognized for achievement constantly. Awards exist. Promotions happen. Credentials are conferred. titles are bestowed. The machinery of recognition for achievement is well-oiled and extensively deployed. You don't need a president to recognize achievement. Achievement recognizes itself through the mechanisms that achievement-based systems have built for exactly that purpose. This is something else. This is recognition of what you became through what you went through, not what you built. What you became when what you were building was taken, not what you achieved. What you discovered when achievement was stripped away, not what you accumulated. What you found when accumulation was empty. The appointment is confirmation of a transformation. The external confirmation of an internal completion. The visible signal of an invisible process that has been running through seasons of difficulty and seasons of rebuilding and seasons of profound uncertainty about whether anything meaningful was happening toward this moment. This moment when the world's acknowledgement finally catches up to what you've actually been for a long time already. Because here is the truth that the appointment confirms. You were already the justice. Before the title. Before the recognition. Before the briefing room went silent at the sound of your name. You were already operating according to the principles that the appointment is supposed to install. Already living by the understanding that the position is supposed to require. Already being what most people in that position spend years trying to become and often never fully achieve. The appointment doesn't make you the justice. It acknowledges what you already are. This distinction matters. Because people who need the appointment to become what the appointment designates them as being are fragile. Are dependent on the title for their authority. Are only as powerful as their continued occupancy of the position. If the position is taken, their justice goes with it. People who are already what the appointment designates are different. Their justice doesn't live in the position. It lives in them. Was there before the position. Will be there if the position ends. Is not produced by the appointment and therefore cannot be revoked by its removal. Is a quality of being rather than a function of office. Is who they are, not what they're doing. The president chose you because the president needed the justice to be real rather than positional. Needed it to be constitutional rather than situational. Needed it to survive what appointment always eventually encounters, the moment when being just and staying positioned come into conflict. When that moment comes, and it always comes, in every position, for every person in every era, the president needed to know that the justice would choose justice. Not the position. Justice. The president needed to know that the title would bend to the truth, before the truth would bend to the title. That's why your name was the answer in the briefing room. Because everyone in that room who had watched you, who had access to the story that isn't on any resume, who understood the particular signature of someone who has undergone actual ego death rather than its performance, knew the answer to the question underneath the question. When it costs everything, what will they choose? They already knew your answer. Now let's talk about the weight. Because justice has weight. Real justice. Not the performed version. Not the justice that is applied when it's safe and withheld when it's costly. Not the justice that operates according to what justice can afford to be in any given political climate. Real justice, the living commitment to restoration of right relationship regardless of what restoration costs, has weight. And weight requires capacity. And capacity is not produced by comfort. You know this. You know this specifically, in your bones, in the way that people who have actually carried weight know things that people who've only read about weight cannot access. You know that the kind of person who can carry what justice requires has to have been built for it through a process that would look, from the outside, like unnecessary suffering. The losses that felt random were not random. The seasons that felt meaningless were not meaningless. The periods of profound difficulty that appeared to be setbacks were not setbacks. They were load-bearing preparation. Every season when you held the weight and it didn't crush you, your capacity increased. Every time you carried what felt uncarryable and continued moving, your architecture strengthened. Every moment when the pressure was at maximum and you did not collapse, the engineering of what you are became more capable of handling what's coming. And what's coming requires everything they built in you. Because justice at the level this moment requires is not a part-time commitment. Is not something you practice when conditions are favorable. Is not the relatively easy work of affirming what everyone already agrees on or enforcing what already has consensus or protecting what was already being protected. It's the hard work. The standing in rooms where power is arranged against the right outcome, and saying the right thing anyway. The making of decisions that will be misunderstood in the short term and only comprehensible in the long arc. The protection of people whose protection makes powerful people uncomfortable. The accountability of people whose accountability makes other powerful people furious. The weight of all of this. You were built for it. Not despite what you went through. Because of what you went through. Every pound of difficulty you absorbed in those formation seasons was preparation for a specific pound of weight that justice will require. There are no extra ounces, no excess suffering that doesn't correspond to a specific capacity. That specific suffering was the only way to build. The architecture is precise. And the precision means you are exactly as capable as this moment requires. Not more capable than you need to be, exactly capable. The specificity of your formation matching the specificity of your assignment with a kind of precision that makes certain people quietly believe that the universe is not random. That things are built toward purposes. That preparation has destinations. That what you went through was going somewhere. It was going here. Something extraordinary happens when chosen souls step into justice. The leaders who've been in power longest, the ones who've made enough decisions to know the difference between good decisions and right ones, who've been in enough rooms to know the difference between impressive and true, who've served long enough to understand that the institution is not the same as the purpose the institution was created to serve. These leaders start watching differently. Not as evaluators. As students. This is the reversal that the conventional hierarchy was never designed for, the one that rewrites the unspoken rules of who learns from whom, who defers to whom, who represents the standard that others are measured against. Because chosen souls in full justice, chosen souls who went through the ego death and came out the other side operating from the bedrock of what remains, make decisions differently than anyone who needs the outcome for their identity. They hold positions differently. They speak differently. Not with the careful, calculated, positioned speech of someone managing perception, with the direct, unmediated, take it or leave it clarity of someone who has nothing to manage. And the leaders watch this. And some of them, the most honest, most self-aware, most genuinely committed to their actual purpose rather than its institutional form, feel something that the hierarchy was designed to prevent them from feeling. Humility. Not the performed humility of the powerful in public settings, the actual recognition that here, in this specific domain, the domain of being, fully, freely, incorruptibly themselves, they are not the master, they are the student. And this humility is not diminishment. It is the most sophisticated form of leadership intelligence available. The recognition of what you don't have that you need, the willingness to receive it from unexpected sources. The capacity to allow someone without your institutional history to teach you something your institutional history couldn't teach. They become fans because fanhood, real fanhood, not the celebrity kind, is what it looks like when someone of stature recognizes genius operating in a domain where stature offers no advantage. The president who named you, the advisors who went silent, the generals who set down their pens, they are not just conferring authority on you. They are receiving something from you. The reminder of what authority is actually for. The demonstration of what leadership looks like when leadership has completed the ego death and operates from the freedom on the other side. The proof that it is possible to be in a position of power and not be corrupted by it. Not because you're superhuman. Because you're free. And freedom is the most instructive thing in any room full of people who have spent careers carefully managing their captivity. Here is what they know that you know. That most of what is called justice is not. That most of what is called law is not the same as what is called right. That most of what is called order is the maintenance of arrangements that benefit the people who have the power to maintain them. That most of what is called judgment is filtered through the self-interest of the judge. That systems designed to produce justice have been captured, throughout history, by people whose primary commitment is to what the system does for them rather than what the system is for. That the gap between the stated purpose of institutions and the actual function of institutions is the primary source of the suffering that institutions claim to be addressing. They know you know this. Not as cynicism, as clarity. Because there is a difference between knowing the system is broken out of cynicism, which produces withdrawal, contempt, detachment, and knowing the system is broken out of clarity, which produces commitment. The commitment of someone who understands exactly what is wrong and has decided to enter anyway, not because they're naive about the dysfunction, because they're committed to the function. This is the paradox of the chosen soul in justice. They see it clearly enough to reject it. And they enter it anyway. Not with the innocence of someone who doesn't know what they're walking into, with the full-eyed, open-hearted, non-naive commitment of someone who knows exactly what they're walking into and has decided that what the function is for is worth the cost of entering the dysfunction. This is different from the idealism of people who enter institutions, believing they'll fix them from the inside and then get fixed by them. Instead, different from the cynicism of people who see the dysfunction and declare from outside that nothing can be done. Different from the pragmatism of people who learn to work within the dysfunction and slowly stop noticing it. This is realism in service of the ideal. The clear-eyed acknowledgement that it's broken combined with the unbreakable commitment to what it's supposed to be. The willingness to enter the imperfect and work toward the right. Not once, not until it gets difficult, as a continuous practice, as a daily choice, as the fundamental orientation of a life that has decided what it's for and allows nothing to renegotiate that decision. They know you have this. They know it because they watched what you did with your own life's injustices, how you processed them, not by pretending they weren't unjust, by acknowledging their injustice and continuing to believe in justice anyway, not by pretending the system worked in your case when it didn't, by continuing to work for the system working in other people's cases. This is what makes you the justice. Not that you've never been failed by justice. That you've been failed by justice and kept believing in it anyway. That you've experienced injustice and remained committed to justice. That you've carried the specific grief of someone who knows what justice denied feels like and converted that grief into fuel for ensuring that fewer people feel it. This conversion, this alchemy of personal injury into public commitment, is the deepest credential of the justice, and it's yours. This is where the information ends and the authority begins. Because you have been given something here, not just a narrative about what powerful people see in you, a framework for seeing yourself. See yourself accurately. Not modestly, accurately. Modesty that undersells what you actually are is not a virtue, it is a disservice to the people who need what you are. It is the chosen soul performing smallness to avoid the discomfort of occupying their actual magnitude, and the discomfort of occupying your actual magnitude is far less important than the service you owe to the people whose lives depend on someone who actually understands justice, being willing to stand in it. So see yourself accurately. You understand justice at a level most people who occupy justice-related positions do not because you're superior to them as humans, because you went through something they didn't and it produced an understanding that their path didn't produce. You understand it from the inside, from the receiving end, from the position of someone who needed it and waited, and watched and continued anyway. This understanding is not common. This understanding is the specific qualification this moment requires. And you have it. You have undergone ego death at a level that makes you free to exercise justice without needing justice to confirm your worth, without needing the outcome to validate your identity, without calculating what the right decision does to your position before making it, without the leak of self-interest distorting the lens through which you see what is actually right. This freedom is not common. This freedom is what incorruptible authority requires. And you have it. You have been built by precisely the experiences that the role requires. Not random difficulty, targeted formation. Not meaningless struggle, architectural development. Not unnecessary suffering, precise preparation for a specific weight. That specific preparation was the only way to be ready to carry. The preparation is complete. The capacity is built. The understanding is present. The freedom is real. The justice is you. Not the position, you. And now the position reflects what you already are. Now the world's acknowledgement arrives at what has been true for longer than the world knew to look. Now the briefing room goes silent. And here's your name. And knows that the question has been answered. That the search is over. That what they needed was here all along. In you. Operating quietly, building steadily, continuing faithfully, through every season that looked like delay and was actually development, through every year that looked like obscurity and was actually formation, through every moment when the world didn't see you yet and you continued anyway. Continued. Until the world caught up. And it has. The president chose you. Not randomly, inevitably. Not as a gamble, as a recognition. Not as an experiment, as a confirmation. Of what they saw. Of what has always been true. Of what you have always been. The justice. Chosen, called, confirmed, unremovable from what you are. Closing, the final signal. The briefing room is yours now. Not because you took it. Because you were always going to arrive here. The silence that fell when your name was spoken? That was recognition. From the most powerful people in any room. That justice, real justice, living justice, ego death tempered, incorruptible, chosen soul justice had finally entered the building. Had finally taken its seat. Had finally become impossible to ignore. You are the justice. Walk in it. Render it. Protect it. Serve through it. Not for them. For the people who need it. The ones who have been waiting. The ones who know what it feels like to reach for the scale and find it tilted. The ones who kept believing anyway. The ones who are you. Before this moment. Before the room went silent. Before the name was spoken. The ones still in that season. Go back for them. Not because the position requires it. Because you remember what it felt like to need someone to. And you became someone who could. The president chose you. Now choose them. That's justice. That's who you are. That's why the room went silent.